This event is sponsored by Miro. Miro is the online whiteboard platform where product teams can work together effectively. If you don't know where to start, it's packed with over 50 templates for product teams. Whether you need a Kanban, mind map, retrospective, product roadmap, or user story map, we've got you covered. Try it for free.
How to crack the PM execution interview in 4 quick steps. Hi all, I wanted to talk about what probably is one of the most important parts of a PM interview, which is the execution interview. From my own experience as a PM, both interviewing as well as conducting interviews, I know that PM interviews could be daunting and challenging at first, but as you get into it and as you start prepping, things become more easy, more clearer. And I know that having this kind of an example would have helped me earlier on in my career. And so I thought it'd be good to cover this topic today. All right, so before we get into it, just quick introduction on who I am. I am Murali. I am a senior PM at Instacart. I work on the consumer growth team at Instacart. Before this, I was at Uber for a while as a PM working on the platform product. And prior to that, I was at Microsoft for a while, helping on the product team for the cloud organization, Office, and a bunch of other enterprise-focused businesses at Microsoft. I started my career as an engineer. And so you'll see in the PM career path, starting as an engineer is quite common, although it's not required. But what's unique about my journey is I don't have formal MBA degree. So my journey has been learning on the job, starting as an engineer and then switching over into product management. Everyone has a unique journey, and so this has given me unique perspective as well on how to think about breaking into product management as well as being successful in the role. All right, so with that, let's get into the core content here. What I hope to cover in this session today is trying to give you a better sense of what is an execution interview, what it's all about, what the interviewer is looking for in the execution interview, what types of questions you might expect in an interview. There's a few different types of execution interview questions. What are some do's and don'ts? When I started my interview process many years ago, I have done many of these mistakes myself and learned over time. And so I want to give you a sense of what are some things that you should be doing and some things that you should try to avoid as you go into the interview. The 4-step answer framework. If there's one thing that I would like you all to take away from this talk, it's really the framework and the approach to answering the execution interview question. You don't have to use the framework that I'm going to talk about. You can use any other framework, but it's very important to have a structure. And so I will talk about the structure that I use, which has helped me in my interview processes as well. And finally, I'll walk you through an example. It's always important to think through how to apply a framework, and when you have a real example, things become real, and it's better to understand as well. Yeah, so those are some things that you should take away from this talk. All right, let's get started. First, what is an execution interview, and what are some question types, and why an execution interview? So the PM job is very much like driving a car. If you imagine your team to be sitting in a car, a PM is in the driver's seat. And so when you're driving a car, you need to be thinking about a few things. First is where to go, right? What is your destination? How to get there? What route should you take? Did you miss a turn? Are you on the right road? Um, and finally, there are situations where you may need to make trade-offs. Should you take the freeway if as you're approaching the ramp, if it looks really busy, should you take the freeway or should you maybe take some inner road? And so the PM job is very much similar to driving a car in that sense. And so the things that you'd need to be really, really good at is setting goals for your team and your product, road mapping, building a roadmap of how to accomplish your goals, having a viewpoint on that, debugging issues, things break along the way many times, and as part of your day-to-day job, you need to be able to understand how to debug issues, understand when there is an issue, and debug it. Trade-offs. Many times, metrics or other aspects of your product present you with interesting challenges, interesting trade-offs. But there's no one correct answer, so you need to have a viewpoint on how to trade off the pros and cons. And so, given that execution is such a core part of the PM job, in the PM interview process, the interviewer will be looking for signals on these four aspects of your thinking. And so the questions are designed to get a sense of how you approach these four aspects of product management. And you may get all four questions, or you may get a few mix, a couple of these, maybe three of these, but usually it covers these four different types. All right, so before I get into the framework and maybe a real example, uh, some do's and don'ts of what you should be doing and should try to avoid when you are answering an execution interview question. And so, like I said earlier, these are things that I have done myself in the past and have learned from. I've seen others do it as well. And so it's really good to think about these and keep it in the back of your mind as you're interviewing. The first thing in terms of what you should do is self-drive the interview. Um, so this is probably one of the most important things about the interview is the more you can self-drive the interview, the more you can be in the driver's seat, the better it is for you and how the interviewer sees you as a strong PM. And so it's okay, and you should ask questions, but at the same time, you should push it along yourself. If you find yourself in a position where the interviewer is trying to kind of push you or guide you, then that's a signal that you should step up and try to push and drive yourself. The second thing is use a framework. And like I said earlier, if there's one thing that I'd like you all to take away from this talk, it is the fact that you should use some sort of a framework. And by framework, I mean really just structuring your answer in a way that's easy to follow, both for the interviewer, but also for you as you think through the problem as well. And the one thing that distinguishes a strong answer versus a weak answer is how structured your answer is. The more structured your answer is, the better it is for the interview outcome as well. So use a framework. I will talk about the framework that I use. You don't have to use this one. You can use any other framework as well. But it's very important to have a framework. Watch for and respond to hints. Um, Things don't always go smoothly. Many times in an interview, you may get off track. That's okay, happens all the time. But it's important to watch for hints and respond to them. So the interviewer is looking to make you successful in the interview. And so if they find that you're going off track, they'll give you hints and clues, and you need to be watchful, watch out for them. And when you get those hints, take those hints and respond to them. And I might cover an example of what this looks like, later on in the example portion of this presentation. All right, so those are some things that you should be doing. What should you avoid? Um, so these things are, usually considered flags in the interview, and these could signal a not so great answer. So you should try to avoid them. First one is jumping straight into reasoning. So when you get a question, you might think there's a very easy answer and just jump straight into it. That's never a good idea. In a PM interview, a one-line quick answer usually is not the right approach. You need to take a step back, try to understand the prompt, try to think the broader context before you get into answering. Not being data driven. This is another big one as well. Uh, Using qualitative, feedback, using user studies, using user feedback, those are extremely important when you design a feature. So when you're thinking about kinds of features to build, what kinds of experiences to build, you absolutely need to think about qualitative feedback. But then in an execution interview, when you're asked about a problem and you're trying to make a decision on it, you need to look for data. You need to understand what kinds of data can you get to make a data-driven decision rather than just a qualitative signal. Finally, giving a hasty response. And this is kind of going back to my first point here. You always need to take a step back, try to think about the why behind the question, try to think about the broader context. Um, and then take your time as you give your answer. It's not about how quickly you can answer the prompt. It's more about how well structured your answer is. So it's okay to take time. It's okay to think about the prompt. Take your time. And again, going back to the point about you need to be self-driving the interview, uh, you can control the pace of the interview. All right, so I think with that, let's actually talk about the whole core of this presentation, which is what are the 4 steps in answering an execution interview question. This is the framework that I like to use. I call this colorful M&Ms are fun. It's just a way for me to remember the aspects of the framework. So there's really 4 parts to this. One is C, which is clarify the prompt. Always start your answer with a clarifying question. Um, and and I'll give some hints on how can you think about questions and what types of questions you'll be asking. It's extremely important to clarify the prompt and be on the same page with the interviewer about what the question is all about and what they are asking of you. The second is mission. So first, try to understand, once you get clarification on the question, try to figure out what is the mission of the team. Before you make decisions, before you get into reasoning, you need to first understand for your team, what is the mission? What are the goals? And so that's extremely important. So it's the mission. Third M is the North Star metric. So once you have your mission, you need to be thinking about how do you measure against that mission? How do you know if you're going on the right track or not? And what is a North Star metric that you should use to measure yourself against the mission? And finally, the funnel, the experience funnel. So usually in some of these execution question types, you will get a prompt where something has to do with the experience that you shipped, or a feature you're thinking about, or some other experiments that your team ran. So you need to understand or think through what the experience was, and what the funnel looked like in terms of how did the experience align with your North Star metric. And as I describe an example, this will become more clear, but it's important to just have a framework of how you approach your answer. All right, so with that, let's actually get into an example question. This will help kind of put things into perspective, make it more clear. So, say you're interviewing at a company called Petflix, and you may get a question like this, which is, say you're the PM of the homepage of Netflix, or sorry, of Petflix. And Petflix is a subscription video streaming company which streams pet videos. The recent feature you're testing has increased the watch minutes per video by 15%, but it has dropped the number of watched videos by 10%. And so the question is, should we ship this feature? So this is a classic execution PM question. And if you think about the different types, this is the debugging type of question, where you're seeing, this could be a debugging and a trade-off question, where you're seeing one metric go up, the other metric go down. So what would you do? Would you ship the feature? How do you think about this problem? All right, so going back to some of the do's and don'ts, let's look at before we look at what an answer could look like, let's look at what is not a great way of answering this question, and what are some common mistakes to avoid. So first is jump straight into reasoning. So you might think of this question and say, oh, okay, 15% increase, 10% drop, probably around 3.5% increase. So it's still a good outcome. Let's ship the feature. No, that's not a good way of approaching this, because you need to first understand what the prompt is all about. Debug through user study feedback. I talked about this earlier. Think about the metrics, think about the data, and make a decision that is grounded in whatever data you can find. Giving a hasty response, what this could look like here is, say, if watch minutes increased, you could say potentially that engagement increased. And increased engagement is usually good, so maybe we should ship this feature. Again, that's not a great answer, because you need to understand how the metrics help your business, how the metric, what is the metric you should even think about before you get into answering. All right, so now let's look at how to go about answering this question. And so thinking through our framework, the first part of the framework is the C, which is clarify your prompt. So clarify your prompt, think about the mission, think about the metrics, and then think about the funnel. So first is clarify the prompt. So before you answer this question, try to understand what the interviewer is even asking you about. So the question was, Petflix is a subscription video streaming company. So you probably want to know, how does the subscription work? What is the subscription model? Is it a per user subscription? Is it some other model? Is it a per month? Is it a per year? Is there some other model? Is it a one-time buy? What does the subscription model look like? Uh, then you might want to ask about the metrics that you were given in the prompt. So the prompt was, watch time increased, but the number of watched videos decreased. And so you might want to ask, what do we mean by watch time? How do we define watch time? Is it just the total of all number of minutes watched in your experiment audience, or is there some other way to measure watch minutes? Similarly, how do we define a watched video? Is a watched video something that is completed, or do we consider it as watched the moment somebody starts watching the video? It probably is some number of minutes that you want to look at in terms of calling a video as watched or not. So it's a good thing to talk to the interviewer about, and understanding how do we define those metrics. What was the actual user experience? So the whole question was about a feature that was shipped that showed some movement in metrics. So you probably want to know, what was the actual feature? What did it change about the experience? And that'll help you put the metrics in context. If a core part of the feature that affects the metric was removed, then probably the metrics are going to drop. And so you want to understand, what's the actual user experience of the metric. So before you proceed, ask these questions and try to get a sense of what the question is all about. And only go to the next step once you have a good understanding of these and maybe other questions that you want to ask to understand what the prompt is. All right, so second part of our metric, second part of our framework is the M, which is define the mission. So once you understand the prompt, you want to define the mission of the team. Again, in order to think about whether a feature is good or bad, you first want to know what are the goals and what is the mission of the team. And an easy way that I have found to define the mission of a team is to first start with the business model of the company or the product that you're trying to answer the question about. So in this case, the product was Petflix, which is a subscription video streaming company. And so if you were to start with the business model of Petflix, it could look something like this. Now, there could be any number of other business models. This is just my assumption. This is something that you should ask your interviewer and align on what the business actually looks like in the first place. So here, Petflix provides entertainment through videos. People watch videos and pay a monthly fee because it's a subscription service. And so that's how Petflix money is through a monthly fee by people. And people get benefit out of it by watching those videos and getting entertained. If this were the business model, then you should think about in terms of your area of the product that you're trying to answer the interview question about, where does that area fit into this business model? So going back to the prompt, the question was, if you were the PM for the homepage, then how would you reason about these metrics? So it's good to think about where does the homepage fit into this business model? And so homepage you could think of as maybe the first page the user lands on. Again, something to clarify in your interview. Assuming it's the first page that users land on, that's probably the page where people start to discover videos. And that's how homepage fits into the business model. That's the place where people start. That's a place where people get to these videos. And ultimately, as they watch videos, they pay for it. And then the business model works that way. So if this is the business model, then you can start to think about what should be the mission of the homepage. And so given that homepage is where people start their journey, according to our assumption here, the mission of the homepage could be something like, help visitors watch engaging pet videos. The mission statement itself doesn't have to be too complicated. We go for the simple version because it's just a tool for you to help get to your next step of your answer. And this is something to align on with the interviewer as well. Think about the mission, make your proposal, and then reason about it. Align with your interviewer on the mission. If you get pushback, you can try to refine it, but have a proposal for the mission before you go to the next step. So assuming that here we say the mission statement is helping visitors watch engaging pet videos, seems like a reasonable mission for the homepage because that's where people start their journey. And so if the homepage can provide a solid experience for people to watch engaging pet videos, it will directly contribute to the business because people watch those videos and then they're more motivated to buy the subscription or retain on the platform. All right, so once you have the mission, the next thing to think about is the other M, which is the North Star metric. And so once you have the mission, it's really easy to think about the metric because the metric is all about understanding how you're doing against mission. And how will you know when you've accomplished your mission or if you're on the right track? So again, going back to this mission statement that we started with, the mission is help visitors watch engaging pet videos. And so in order to measure success here, perhaps a good way to measure this is just understanding how many people are actually watching these videos. The frequency could be any number of different frequencies. I picked monthly in this case because it's a monthly subscription service. So it probably makes sense to measure the monthly active watchers. You could also think about other frequencies which more closely align with the natural frequency of when people watch these videos. Could be weekly. Um, Daily seems too frequent for something like this. But assuming that we pick monthly as frequency, monthly active watchers seems like a good North Star metric, because if you increase this number, then you're probably doing good in your business because you get more subscribers and ultimately you make more money. Um, and the product is successful. And so monthly active watchers seems like a simple enough North Star metric to think about. Another tip in terms of thinking through your metrics and picking a North Star metric, always go for a metric that is simple. And it's usually better to pick a volume-based metric like a monthly active number, for example, than something that's more a percentage. For example, one metric you could think about here is, conversion rate, like of number of people who land on the homepage, how many of them watch a video. It's probably something you want to measure, but it's not a great North Star metric to have, because it doesn't tell you at the end of the day how many people do you have on your platform, which is what you need for your business to be successful. So usually a simple volume-based metric is a good way to think about your North Star metric, rather than something like a conversion rate or some other rate where you cannot necessarily control, the number of people in that metric. All right, so once you have, your mission and your metric, you're actually pretty far along. You're actually doing pretty well at this point, because you have your mission, you have your metric. So now it makes it really easy to go to the next step, which is reason about the question that you were asked, which is some metric went up, some other metric went down. What do we do? So because you have your North Star metric, in this case, it is monthly active watchers. A simple answer here could be, you probably want to measure the impact on your North Star metric to reason about how the experiment or the feature is doing. Did the feature increase monthly active watchers, or did it drop monthly active watchers? Um, and so if you see a good movement on your North Star metric, that probably is a good signal to decide whether or not to launch the feature. At this point, you should have a conversation with your interviewer about how does the metrics that the interviewer talked to you about align or line up to your North Star metric. How does watch minutes line up to your North Star metric? How does the number of watched videos line up in this case? But ultimately, your decision framework should be based on what the metric that you pick is as your North Star, and not something that's like much up funnel where you're not able to understand what your how much of a business impact your feature is having at the end of the day. All right, so once you have this, you're almost there, but not quite there yet. You still need to think about one of the most important parts of this answer, which is what was the actual feature that was shipped in the experiment. And so a good way to structure that portion of the interview is to think about it as a UI funnel, meaning the homepage sits at the very top of the funnel in this case, where people are landing on your platform, on Petflix in this case, on the homepage, and ultimately they're ending in watching a video, which is kind of what you're measuring, monthly active watchers. So what does that funnel look like from homepage to watching a video? This could be an example funnel where users start on the homepage, and then they maybe browse videos, maybe search for some videos, and ultimately end up watching a video. There could be other parts of the funnel as well, depending on what the actual experience looks like, and something that you should talk to your interviewer about and get on the same page about the funnel. But once you have a funnel, then you have a good sense of how to reason about the metric. For example, if watch minutes increased, it could be because you made a change on the homepage where it was easy to discover videos. Same goes for the number of videos as well. And so it's important to understand what was the experience that was shipped and keep that in the back of your mind as you reason about these metrics. The other reason it's important to understand the funnel is because usually a follow-up to the metrics question is going to be about what are you going to do about it, and what are the next steps for your team. And so once you understand what the experience looks like, where it fits in the funnel, then you have a good framework of proceeding. You might say something like, if I would like to look at which parts of the funnel are contributing to my North Star metric, or where in the funnel am I seeing a big drop? Those could be good directions to go in terms of thinking about the next steps or thinking about road mapping features. All right, so at this point, we've clarified our prompt, we've talked through our metrics, we've talked through the mission, and we have a funnel. And that, if you cover these things in your interview, these would be a reasonable, well-rounded answer to give for a prompt like this. And again, there's always a conversation. It's not you don't want to go 15 minutes into your interview on a monologue without any feedback from your interviewer. Extremely important to get feedback from your interviewer along the way and course correct if required. If you cover these four things, at this point you should have a well-rounded answer uh, for this type of execution question. All right, so with that, I want to move to kind of the final portion of this, which is some bonus tips. As you prep for your interviews, it's extremely important to practice aloud. Um, it makes a world of difference when you think through a response, on paper or in your mind versus actually talking through it. Because when you talk, there's different ideas, there's different framework of how you approach things. So practice aloud, it's very important. Um, Prep for a 30-minute response. Usually interviews tend to be about 45 minutes. If you break the 45 minutes down, it's 5 minutes of introductions, maybe 5-10 minutes at the end for questions. And so the core of the interview is about 30 minutes. So as you prep for your interview, make sure to time yourself and be comfortable with a 30-minute approximate format. And the last point here is probably one of the most important. Dry run with somebody who's done this before. Um, you cannot improve if you don't know where you're going wrong. That's the mistake that I did as well in prepping for my interviews when I started my journey. Um, it's important to get feedback, course correct where required, and iterate on your approach. So dry run as many as you can with a PM counterpart, and if it's somebody who's done it before, that's ideal. All right, so I think those are some things that I wanted to cover. Hopefully, you got a good sense of what the execution interview looks like. What are some of the types of questions? What's an example question and an example response? Some tips on preparation. So if you have more questions, if you think the content was useful, I plan to publish more on my personal website. You can reach out to me here as well. It's muralink.co. And hopefully you found value out of this talk. Good luck with your interviews. Thank you.